Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the weekly show with myself. My name is Jimmy Casas, and I'm with the one and only Dr. Joe Sanfilippo. And I cannot tell you, we are super jazzed as always. I know that's hard to believe, but yep, it's amazing what happens when you get up in the morning and you realize for the first time, and I can't tell you how many times we've done the show, Joe and I were actually here with plenty of time to chat before the show started. And that, my friends, rarely happens. So
it might have been the first time.
Good morning,
Good morning, man. How you been? All good? All good?
All good. Yep. Back in the house. That's always a good sign. So better than a hotel room. And I see you're at where are you at? Grandmother's house? Where are you at?
Yeah, Phillips, Wisconsin. I got the farm in the background here, and the chickens are out. Looks like the chickens are out, and it's cold. It's like 8 degrees or something like that. It was super cold last night, but so it ain't awesome. But at the same time, we're like, yeah, it's cold. That's where are we at? It's 20. It's actually not too bad. It's 20 degrees. So actually, it's not too bad today. We're good. We'll take 20.
I laughed
I'll
take 20. The chickens are out. That's a good sign right there. When the chickens are out, that's pretty good.
I didn't have to let them out either. So it's good. I never have to let them out. My father-in-law takes care of it, but yeah, they're out. They're out there. So the way it works. It's northern Wisconsin, man. I'm telling you right now.
Every time I think of chickens, I think of, is it Rocky IV? Where's the one he's chasing the chickens around? I can't remember which Rocky it is. He's chasing
one of them. It's got to be 4.
One of them is chasing the chickens. Yep. I mean, probably in every Rocky because.
Yeah, I'm not doing it.
Nope, not doing that. Okay, not exercising. I know you're not running, so I'm not worried about that. So
please,
no worries there.
Jimmy, please, we don't run. We don't unless I'm being chased. Maybe buy that chicken.
That's right. Hey, listen, we're talking leadership and culture this morning, as always, because it's always about leadership and how it impacts culture and the morale of our people in our organization. If you are interested, good morning, Miss Amy. If you are interested, and join us in the studio this morning. If you have a question, if you have a problem of practice, if you have something you're pondering, and you dare, yeah, that's right. If you dare ask Joy and I our opinion on something, be careful. So we're warning you. Good morning, Donna. Thank you for being here this morning. And yeah, we'd love to talk leadership and culture. As we always say, honestly, Joe and I really don't talk about what we're going to talk about because we want it to be just kind of random. Wherever it goes, the conversation goes. So we'd like it to be really organic. So I'm going to ask Dr. Joe Sanfilippo what's on his mind. And if he cannot think of anything, then we'll think of something together. Or hopefully one of you will throw it in here and we'll get started. Jeffrey, good morning. And thank you for being here as well. We got an early crew here this morning on a Saturday morning. And it was Valentine's week, Joe. And I hope you took care of your lady. That's all I got to say. Because that's, taking care of your people. And you better be taking care of your wife, dude.
It's next week. When is it? It's this week?
You missed it. It's too late.
All right. That's all right. We'll figure it out along the way. I'm kidding. So, I've been in school all week this week. And it was really interesting. We had a couple of things happen this week that were like kind of got us into more collective conversations about what we're doing. And we had conferences this week, and we also had a PD day on Friday. And so it was really cool to see our staff members just kind of connecting and having conversations. And what was really awesome was they found time within the context of all of those days to just literally sit down and talk. And that was, to me, that makes everything go a lot better. Because when you have these, the informal conversations, it just kind of in passing, it really changes the conversation when you got to have tough conversations in terms of the work that's happening around us. So I think we've been really I'm very lucky to be in a place where our staff does a phenomenal job of just making sure that they connect with each other. And I think that makes a huge difference in the overall outlook of the building. So I think, I think about when's the last time that we have those conversations? When's the last time that we as leaders have just had informal conversations with people, not directed towards an agenda item or not directed towards something that needs to get done or whatever. It was just a conversation. We used to call them Seinfeld conversations, those, because Seinfeld was a show about nothing. So
kind of like our show, Joe. Kind of like the show.
We should call them the weekly show conversations, the story of the conversations about nothing. But how often are you having those conversations that put you in a much better position when you have to have tough conversations. And I think being more intentional about it this week was really great, just to kind of be in spaces where people were, and that really helped the conversation moving forward too. So what about you?
Well, it's interesting when you started that conversation, because there were two things I was thinking about when you were talking about PD and you were talking about conferences. And then I saw Beverly's question pop up, and she says, how do surveys for parents to complete from the county level about school admin help or hurt? And so let me try to process that and share a couple thoughts on that, Beverly. The first thing I think of when I think of parent surveys or community surveys, or, there's a bazillion 360 surveys, any type of survey that's being given out. The first thing is I always wonder is this: why are we given the survey? That's one thing I would always ask. Why are we even given the survey? And two, what are we going to do with the results once we get the results back? And I think that's really important. I think there's where we lose a little bit of credibility sometimes, and that people begin to become a little bit maybe apathetic about surveys. So just think of a few scenarios, right? And again, I'll just be very transparent. I always say this, like, I always think back, especially early on, not that I didn't make tons of mistakes even later on in my principalship, but especially early on. I mean, I can see it right now, right? All these surveys. And I think, okay, so we give out these surveys and we get all this information, and then we look at the information. I'm going to talk from an admin level. I look at the information. I'll be really honest. I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, there's a good comment. There's a nice comment. And all of a sudden, pow, there it is. I just get jacked right in the throat, right? I get the first zinger in the survey. And as soon as I get that first zinger in the survey, honestly, I just start looking for all the zingers. That's what I'm kind of doing. And I'm a little wounded. I'm a little hurt. I'm a little defensive. And quite frankly, I go find somebody else on my team to complain to about this response on the survey. And then we talk about trying to figure out, well, who do you think said that on the survey?
Yep.
I mean, I'm just being honest. And so it was that I just over and over, right? And then we become, quite frankly, at least for me, I'm becoming defensive about all the comments people are leaving me. And then I kind of dismiss them, to be honest. If I don't agree with them, I dismiss them. And it doesn't mean that I never went back and reflected and thought, well, maybe there's a little bit of truth. I'm not saying I didn't do that too, but I know my first reaction often is because these things are hurtful. The thing about surveys, Bev, in my opinion, is that everyone's vulnerable. Everybody in the district, from the Board of Education to the superintendent and central office to the building principals to the teachers, everybody's vulnerable. And it's my experience that, yeah, there are comments on there that are helpful. There will be people who will fill out a survey and be very thoughtful and very reflective, and they will share some things that are really helpful, and they'll do it in very tactful and very professional and kind and caring ways. But the problem is that is often outweighed by the zingers that we will get. There will be people who will share things in not so kind ways and so forth. So I guess here's my point. If I'm going to give a survey like that, because oftentimes we have to, and we've talked about this on the show before, Joe, I think this whole idea of anonymous surveys, which I don't believe in, but I understand it because the notion is that people won't tell the truth or be honest because they're worried that they're going to get in trouble or someone will hold it against them. And I still say that says a lot about our culture, right? I'm not sure that's helping us. I think it's actually hurting us. But if I have to give it because that's the expectation, then I'm going to try to, first of all, counterbalance that by doing a different type of survey, probably very, very transparent, asking my boss or asking those above me that, hey, is it okay if I do this? And here's why I want to do it. I would then share it with the staff, what I'm doing, why I want to do it. And I would try to do some face-to-face surveys. So in this case, if I'm doing a parent survey that's anonymous, then what I may try to do to counterbalance that is I might put out a communication to all parents saying, hey, I'm looking for a few parents who wouldn't mind having a conversation with me. I would definitely send them questions ahead of time so they can have some time to process it. I think you'll get better responses. And then I would call them and ask some questions and get some thoughts on it, whether I would do some randomly, maybe I would do some by volunteer, and I would try to get as much of a heterogeneous pool that I could and try to counterbalance. Because the difference is at least you're now having a conversation. The other one, you're just receiving the information. There is no conversation to be had. And just like we see on social media, sometimes people really don't want to have a conversation. They just want to drill you. They just want to zing you and walk away. They don't really want to solve a problem or have a conversation or have dialogue or see dissension or another viewpoint. It's attacking, it's personal, right? And so that's what I would say, Beverly, is I would try to really reach out and try to have some conversation with some of our stakeholders, and not just parents, but obviously students, our staff, and obviously community members as well. So those are some thoughts.
And maybe like what are we really asking in the survey? What are we trying to get to at the end of it? And was the survey developed in concert with everybody, or was it developed at, one person just said, well, these are the questions that we're going to ask? Or did you have a group that just said, here's the things that we want to know about how things are going, and what we're all willing to do to kind of move the building forward or move the group forward, or whatever the case may be? And I think that always having something in there in that survey about what do you like that's happening right now, right? And then getting into, are there any other conversations we have as a group? What do we want to get better at? I think when it comes down to one person, it ends up being one person's responsibility, though I don't think anybody in the school would say like, well, it's one person's responsibility to do all the stuff. Yet at the same time, we're taking a survey or giving a survey that then allows somebody to say, well, one person's, in charge of all the stuff, and they're not. So can we collectively say, as a group, this is what we really like about what's going on right now. As a group, this is what we really want to work on moving forward. And then the leader in that space can take a look at that stuff and say, okay, so as a group, we want to get better at X, Y, or Z. And then put out, then they can follow up with, here's a plan for us to get better with X, Y, or Z. And is there anybody that wants to be part of that conversation? Because in the survey, this indicated, so forth and so on. We find ourselves, I find myself in the same situation all the time, Jimmy. It's just like, it doesn't matter if there are, 99 good comments and one like just slam zinger that you're talking about. I'm going to sit on that thing for way too long. And actually, I did that in the walk last week. I was talking about I got some feedback on a keynote that I had done recently, and I told a story that somebody was really upset about, and they told me they were really upset about it. And I'm thankful that they were willing to say something, because it was a perspective that I had literally never heard before, because I've been telling that story for probably 8 years. So, and I've never heard any negative feedback on it. But ironically, there was somebody else that emailed me earlier in that day that told me they loved the keynote and specifically referenced that exact story that the other person was upset about. So now am I going to stop telling the story because one person was upset about it? Or am I going to keep telling the story because one person was really, excited about it? Either way, I think we spend too much time on both sides. Right? If we spend too much time looking at all the stuff that's going well and say, okay, things must be perfect, right? We're in the wrong situation. If we do the same thing on the other side, where we're like, well, things must be going really, really bad, we're also in a bad situation. So if you can find some trends, a little bit of trends, if something common keeps coming up, then it's a conversation to have. But if it's like, all great or all bad, you're like, or whatever you're doing, you got to figure out like, what are you going to really invest in, and how's it going to change your affect?
Yeah, I like that, Joe. And you think about feedback, right? So let's just say part of this, what we're talking about this morning, is feedback. And I know that Kimberly's conversation started about a parent survey, but it's no different in terms of just getting feedback from all stakeholders, right? So let's just take that for a second. And I do think it's important that a couple of times a year, again, that we do take time, call it whatever you want, a temperature check, call it an opportunity to recalibrate, whatever it is, the term, it's basically going back and hitting the reset button, right? It's being intentional. It's slowing down and saying, hey, we need to slow down and take a look at what we're doing. How effective is it? Where are we, missing? Where are we coming up short? What do we need to do better? Whatever that is. But then I want our audience to remember, this is still about a process, right? We still have to be careful, because I do believe that sometimes we do things, whether they're initiatives, whether it's a new literacy program or whatever, something fails. We kind of blame the program and want them to go buy a different program, right? And it's not even that. It's the process that we use to get voice, to give people some skin in the game, to hear people's concerns. Because even that, you can still move forward with the initiative, but the idea is that feedback will help you avoid what we call those undercurrents, because we'll see them before they come. Hey, we're going to do this, but help me identify those. So all that feedback is really important. And here's why it's important to me, at least in my opinion, why we need to do more of this as leaders. Because our job is to not only influence, but to provide experiences for the staff that works for us to hopefully say, I really like this experience. And what if I replicated this experience in my classroom?
Right.
We have to remember that everything we do as leaders is impacting the classroom. That's why we win this role, to make a greater impact at a greater level. Well, the only way to do that, in my opinion, is to model, to teach, right? And we have to be really clear in those expectations. But these practices that we're doing, people are watching. So if we expect teachers to be great in the classroom, then principals, we have to be great in that faculty meeting, because that's like our classroom.
Right.
And I was reminded again yesterday when I was talking to a teacher in a school. She's a department chair, and she asked me a question that she was really frustrated with some of her members of her team. And I said, but one of the things you have to remember is you have to see them almost like your classroom. You know, this conversation started that you told me that you thought you were a very effective classroom teacher. I want you to reflect on what made you an effective classroom teacher. And I've already heard you say some things. And so my question to you is, are you still modeling that in your level? If you see it differently, then I think you'll respond differently. And she just went, oh my God, that's absolutely right. I said, yep, just like you expect them to differentiate, you're going to have to differentiate as well. Just like you expect your teachers to get feedback from kids, you're going to have to get feedback from them as well. Just like you expect them never to quit on those kids, you can't quit on those teachers. Everything replicates to me, and systems work, right? And this is systems. So that feedback, here's the good news, Joe. Like you said, whether it's good feedback or whether it's feedback that hurts you or makes you pause or makes you angry, either way, you got to find the learning in that feedback. That to me is the key. Got to find the learning.
And we don't do that enough. And I think we just kind of not, we move on from it quickly. And at the same time, if we're thinking about ways to really kind of engage in like why, going back to why we did it to begin with, well, if you're not going to look at the feedback, don't ask the question.
That's right.
Right? I mean, like,
or if you're not going to like the feedback, don't ask the question, right?
That's also true.
It.
Yeah, I guess if you can put your time and effort into where it's going beyond the time that you ask the question, it's a different conversation. So, and I think it's important that we continue to get feedback from people, but it doesn't always need to be in survey form too. Let's be honest about that. Like, how many, you're talking about temperature checks along the way. How often are we doing that? Are we just sitting down with people and saying, hey, how are things going? Is there anything else that you need? Are there conversations that we need to have? What's the pulse of certain groups in certain spots? I mean, you all have opinion leaders in your organizations. Are we sitting down with those opinion leaders along the way just to have, periodic checks to see how they're doing, how other people are doing, and how we can help? And a lot of times, the thing about those conversations that's really important is once you get done with a conversation like that, it doesn't mean if somebody's struggling with something, I see a lot of leaders, like they hear about something going on and they run to fix the problem right away. Right. And that's just not a good idea because what ends up happening is the person that told you about the issue is now stuck in the middle of that problem. The person that's having the problem may not want any help with the problem. At the same time, just knowing it so you can, my advice in that situation is if you hear about some stuff going on in a certain area of the building or a certain department or whatever the case may be, and that might need to be addressed down the way. Well, how much time are we spending in those spots informally? It goes back to the first conversation that we had. Where are those informal conversations, just being in the space so they feel more comfortable having the conversation with you? Because otherwise, if the only time that you ever go down there is to have a tough conversation, then every time that you walk in the room, people start wondering like, why are you here, right? It goes back to when we were in COVID and we had to do the contact tracing and everything like that. And if kids were close to another kid, then they had to get out of school or whatever the case may be. And we would walk into coaches' classrooms and they would be like, I saw you both walking down here. And as soon as you were walking down here, I knew it. I just knew something was going to be bad, right? And so that takes a lot to get past unless you're in that space more often. And you can. Travis was mentioning about the position and the personality and your persona and everything that goes along with it. I think what we have to understand is that our position always precedes our personality, but that doesn't mean that it should overtake our personality. You can still be in that spot. You'll always be the principal, no matter what. Like you're gonna walk into a spot, you're the principal. It doesn't matter. Like you can't like not be the principal and just have conversations with people like you're not the principal because you're the principal, right? So you have to know that, but at the same time, it doesn't supersede who you are as long as you know that precedes your personality. Your personality can still be what it is, but the more that you're in those spaces, the easier it's going to be to have those tough conversations. And that's where you get, I think, the best feedback. I think you get much better feedback from that than you do from an anonymous survey that just says, here's how I'm feeling about something. And because I do the same thing. If I get something negative, I'm like, well, who did that? Who said that? What did I do to that person? How come that person's mad at me or whatever? Or if the score, like if it's an overall score, if it's overall score and like it's like a, like a 0.2 lower than it was the previous year, you're like, wait a minute. I thought I was much better in this area this year than I was. I felt better. How come it's a 0.2 less?
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? What does 0.2 even mean? But at the same time, I spend an inordinate amount of time looking at that going, how come the score was at this level or that level, or what's it going to take to get to whatever level, or how come I only have 5 comments instead of 7 comments or whatever. And then all of a sudden it turns into like, now you're evaluating the survey as opposed to the content in the survey. It just is a mess. So the more that you can get the informal feedback conversations, and the people, the opinion leaders like we were talking about, but the people in your organization that have a really good foothold on what's going on, how are we connected to those people to make sure we can get an actual pulse of the building? And you do that by having conversations with them, but you lose that when you have the conversation and then run to fix the problem right away, because the person that's got the pulse of the building is going to stop telling you about what's going on because they know you're just going to run and try to fix it. And why would they want to do that? Because then they're stuck in the middle.
Yeah. When you were just sharing that, I go to the process, right? That's what we talked about before. It's the process that's wrong. It's how do I manage that? And so I started in my head thinking about 2 things, Joe. One, I remember when I was a classroom teacher and I was taking my leadership courses and I would shadow my principal, or I would underfill, I guess that's what we used to call it back then, right? When the building principal was going to be out of the building for a part of the day, they'd let you underfill and so forth. And I remember one time he said to me, hey, come with me. I need to go talk to a student in a classroom. And I said, okay. So I followed him down the hallway. We walked into a classroom, but here's what he did. And I've never forgotten this. He walked in, Joe, and I bet he talked to about 12 kids. But one of the kids he talked to was the kid he needed to talk to.
Yeah.
All right. And we walked out. I said, hey, you said we need to talk to a kid. And we were in there for, 10 minutes. And you talked to all these kids. He goes, I know, because I learned a long time ago when I only walk in, I talk to the kid who I needed to talk to. When I walk out, everybody's looking at that kid.
Yeah, that's
right?
a great
and
point.
Sometimes it would be like, ooh, what'd you do? Right. All that
Right.
level. And, of course, this was a middle school at the time. So there's a lot of that, just that lack of maturity and so forth.
Right.
And now the class gets disrupted and all this kind of stuff. No, he was just doing his routine walkthrough, talking to kids, and just happened to be talking to one of that kid about something. Right. And so that was always a reminder for me. So, that's maybe a takeaway for administrators when you walk to classrooms, which I think is a great practice, right? To get into classrooms, to talk to kids about low level things or things we need to remind them or check on them about something. Don't just walk in and talk to that kid, talk to as many kids as you can. And then the second thing, now this one actually reminded me too, and I started laughing at my head, is I was in a school district one time that, and this is a reminder if there's any HR directors listening, you don't want to be the HR director who only goes to the building.
Yeah.
And when the employees start taking their keys out, that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign. So you probably want to get out there more often and get into some classrooms and talk to the teachers. I always laugh because the position is called HR. And in this district, ding, 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 here come the keys, because they're like, clean your desk out. We're marching you out today. So that is not good for culture, people. So
no, not at all.
Just remember that. So, hey, great comments this morning. Good morning, Rochelle. Good to see you. And thank you for those who continue to comment and share. And Travis Bloom, yes, those one-to-one meetings. We love that. Again, the key is don't just do them once, people, because it kind of comes across as checking the box. You got to follow up again at some point. Make it part of what you do. This is our culture. This is what we do. We sustain it. We do it over a period of time. And again, part of that, yes, is to see the culture through their eyes, right? But it's also, hopefully, if we create an experience, that they'll take it back to the classroom and replicate it with their students, right? Same thing. Sit down with one-on-one meetings with the students. Now, leaders, we've impacted a system. It's not just in isolation. It's being replicated around the building. And I always believe that's a really good thing. So,
and it
so
helps
Joe,
with
go ahead.
it does help with the idea that we want to keep in mind as well is how much are we taking on when we start some of these, if you're going to have meetings or if you're going to have, conversations or whatever the process that you come up with. I think two of the things that are really important. First of all, people know and understand the process, what that's going to look like, why you're coming in, why you're having the conversation, what you're going to do with the information, all of that. That's the first thing. But the second thing is, I think a lot of times we get really excited about the prospect of doing these things. And then we do them and we do a round of them, or we speak to one group of people, and then all of a sudden the world takes over. And we've got kids lined up at our door. We've got adults lined up at our door. We've got a lot of reports to take care of. We've got state stuff. We've got testing. We've got all the stuff that then comes on top of us. And the thing that we wanted to do gets pushed off to the side because of all the garbage that's right in front of us at this time. So I think when you're talking about the process, it's always better from my perspective, or in my experience, I shouldn't say it like that. In my experience, it's always been better to start low, to start small, and build from there. If you say, I'm going to meet with everybody once a month. Well, are you though? Because the first couple of weeks you might be able to, but then all of a sudden the world takes over. What if you said we're going to make sure that we make 2 checks per semester, or a check per semester, or whatever the case may be, something that that you can deliver on. Because if you put something out there that you can't deliver on, then the process becomes watered down. And you don't get the results that you're looking for. You don't get the information you're looking for, and you get a lack of credibility in terms of what goes on, which then impacts the next initiative that you want to do. The next initiative may have nothing to do with what you started doing with the meetings, the conversations, but the next time that you bring something forward, people are going to respond back to, well, he also started wanting to talk about these meetings, and I haven't even met with them yet, and it's February. Right. Yeah. So all of a sudden that impacts your system, that impacts your process. So I would say we talk about the idea of getting a win early. What are you doing to make sure that you get a win early? But once you get that win early, it's got to be followed up with a process that you can control, a process that you can follow through with, and a process that you're going to be able to deliver on. So you don't feel like so it doesn't feel like it was just a one-time thing, which then impacts the next process that you're trying to get pushed forward.
Joe, that is spot on. And just to summarize that a little bit, if I heard Joe correctly, it's a reminder to all of us when we make these commitments and we're going to do this, right? I'm going to get into so many classrooms this year, or all these promises we make. When we don't fulfill that because we try to do everything, then we do lose credibility. And then it's interesting because that's a little bit when we get the reaction from the staff, right? That they see an initiative or something we commit that we're going to do, and then it doesn't happen. Then eventually what happens is they become apathetic. They've had these experiences where they've heard this a bazillion times. The follow through is never there. Therefore, we lose credibility. And so that's going to hurt us. And so this is an important reason why building leadership teams play such a critical role in our work as leaders. We need that go-to team. That is an area. If we have grade level team members or department chairs, and we can start with them, we can, again, model for them a process. And if we're really intentional and we explain the process and why we're doing it and the benefits that come from it, then they can replicate that back maybe in their grade level teams or the departments. And therefore, you don't have to do it all. But it is a good practice. But again, there are a lot of factors that come into this. Is how are we using our admin assistants to hold us to that level of accountability?
Yes.
How do we give people permission? Because again, we want to do these things. Joe, after the holiday break, I saw a tweet, and I'm not sure exactly all the words, but it basically said something like this. Hey, principals, let's commit to this week getting into all the classrooms. I challenge everyone to 100 classroom visits this week. So this is January 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever, right? The first thing I thought in my head is that's actually going to hurt them. That's actually going to hurt them.
Yes.
Because it all is about this. I want you to sustain that over the entire semester, not in 1 week, not go 100 miles an hour and then not see you for 2 months in the classroom, right? I'd rather see you once every 3 weeks all year long than one time, that you think, oh, I got in everybody's class. That's great. You're never going to be able to sustain that. Yeah. It's almost gimmicky a little bit. And so again, these are just my opinions. And if you've done that, fine, because I've done it too. So it's a reminder to go back and say, maybe I need to reflect on that and maybe take a different approach to that. So
Well,
You
and
know,
I
just
think
something to go
it
think
ends
about.
you set yourself up for failure along the way
Yep.
too. Just to get, it's great. And I love being in that space where I'm going to get to however many places, but at the same time, if it's just a walk by conversation and you just go to the next, because you like, how are you going to do that? I mean, over the course of that amount of time, and I feel like I find, I don't know. What's interesting to me, Jimmy, honestly, is from my role, from a superintendent role, like, the principals need to be in classrooms, having conversations, helping with instruction, being part of the conversation. And I have this balance where I feel like I don't want to go over the top of what our principal is doing, because I want to make sure that the first connection is with the principal. But at the same time, I still want to know what people are doing. And not even instructionally as much as I just want to connect with them because they're great people. And so, what's the balance for being in the space? And honestly, when it comes down to it, I spend more time in those spaces connecting with kids, just because it's more natural to be in that spot. Because if I'm going in there just to kind of look at the way that people are instructing, all of a sudden it turns to be like an evaluation process, and I don't want that to be the case either. So just going in and hanging out with a kid for a couple minutes, or doing what you were saying before. If you have to talk to a kid, you talk to 12 kids. Well, I don't have to talk to any kids for the most part, but I can go in and talk to 5 just to say how you doing and what are you working on and that kind of thing. And then that ends up being more of a conversation where it doesn't feel like it's evaluative. It doesn't feel like it's, like you're looking for something, or why are you in here? I mean, if I could just kind of go to the kid part of it, it helps me from a superintendent lens, because my role isn't to go in there and make, adjustments to instruction. That's not, like, I want them always going to their building level principal, because that's where the relationship should be made. And I should have great relationships with my principals and model what that looks like, so they can do that with their
Yep.
staff members.
Absolutely. Joe, I feel like the themes continue to come back, and I do, Joe, that's the one thing we did share before we started the show, is that, I know, and I speak for Joe too in this, because we have these conversations, but I know when we're in buildings, when we walk in and we look at the culture of an organization, and if we look at that culture as being the behavior in the organization, we do see the problems continue to be the same problems. They intersect in different ways, but they're the same, basically, fundamentally the foundation, the same problems, building to building, district to district,
Yes.
regardless of the size, regardless of the area. And because it is about behavior. So it's really important. And it's a reminder to all of us, the intentionality behind that, Joe, here it comes again, the same theme, even in the show that comes back, is how are we being intentional with our time? And in this case today, I felt like it was all about feedback. That's funny, because we never even talked about what it would turn into. But thank you, Kimberly. I think it was the start of the conversation. Beverly, sorry. Yes, Beverly. Yeah. And it's all about being intentional. And if we're going to get feedback, then we have to examine, as you shared earlier, Joe, why are we doing this? What's the process that we're going to use? Who's going to be involved? Have we communicated that effectively? What are we going to do with the results? And at the end of the day, to me, really, it is about giving people a voice, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's at the building level or being at the district level. So how can we just be really more intentional on that and model that? So systemically, if we all did it, I think we'd create a healthier culture. And to me, that's leadership, because then it influences the entire system. So anyway, Joe, believe it or not, folks, we have 33 minutes gone, and I'm going to let Joe close this, and we are out of here for this morning. So thank you for those who jumped in. So Joe.
We really appreciate everybody being with us. And this is why sometimes I feel like it's just for us to talk back and forth, because we don't get a chance to talk as much as we used to. And now we do this kind of just to have that conversation. So we appreciate people being along with us and continuing to ask questions, because if we can help in any way, then we will certainly do that. We don't have all the answers. We just don't. But at the same time, if we can kind of talk some of these problems out and model what it looks like to actually talk some of these problems through, then we put ourselves in a better position. So as you look into next week, take a look into the intentionality of how you lead and where you're spending your time and who you're spending your time with. But how many informal conversations are you having along the way that impacts when you have to have a tough conversation beyond, the day-to-day operation of what you do? Sometimes just taking a look at, just writing down, where were you throughout the course of the day? At the end of the day, just sit down and say, okay, so I got to this place, I got to this place, I got to this place. And then the next day, do the same thing. I got to this place, this place, and this place. And then the third day, do the same thing. I got to this place, and this thing. And then see if there are any trends in terms of A, where you're spending your time, B, who you're spending your time with, and C, when are you spending your time there? Because those all impact what you're seeing, what you're looking for, and how and what kind of actually informal feedback you're getting for the building, because you might not be only seeing the same things all the time. So be intentional about what that looks like to give you an actual look at what the space, the organization that you're leading is, because you give yourself a chance to see different things. Do that for a couple days and see how that works. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you about it when we jump back into it next week. And Jimmy, it's always a great time. Always a great
buddy.
time. We hope everybody has a wonderful, wonderful week, and good luck, and keep leading, because it's leadership always, because it's always about leadership. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.